And to give us an update live on the casting of ballots for the U.S. presidential elections, we have VOA correspondent Jessica Stone live from Arlington, Virginia. Good evening, Jessica, and good morning. Good morning all the way.
Good morning and good evening to you.
Wow, we are finally at this date. I can't believe that the year has flown by and we're finally at this pivotal moment. The U.S. presidential election is actually underway and the world is holding its breath. What do you feel right now so far as the current voter turnout?
Well, it's hard to say what the national voter turnout is, but we definitely saw a spike in certain groups coming to the polls for early voting. We saw more rural voters and more Republican voters take advantage of early voting, which started in some cases across the country as far back as a month ago. And that definitely indicates not only a desire to participate in the process, but also to make sure that barriers are reduced to participating in the process, right? Here in Virginia, we have seen a steady stream of voters. The wait right now, I'm told, behind me is about 5 or 10 minutes. When I early voted on Friday, it was quite a bit longer, closer to 20 or 25 minutes. So there, too, we saw an increase in early voting, although not as large as we saw back in 2020. But, of course, that was in the height of the pandemic and all of those pandemic precautions. I think there's quite a bit of interest but also a lot of disappointment in the candidates themselves. Both of these candidates have record low popularity ratings, although interestingly, Trump's popularity is slightly ahead in some polls of Harris's. And then, just how this campaign came about, the comeback potentially of an impeached president going against the vice president, which was elevated at the last minute to the presidential nominee, really without any primary vetting. So there's a lot of controversy on both sides, but a lot of interest, too, because we have a world that is getting much more interested and much more dangerous. We have U.S. soldiers abroad that are still involved in conflicts in the Middle East, and the U.S. dollar is certainly also at play in Europe with the war in Ukraine. So a lot of implications and a lot of eyes watching, and that's not even to say anything of what's going on in Asia with the U.S.-China competition being front and center for many of our friends in East Asia and Southeast Asia.
So even if we are actually on the ground right now with voters pouring in to their respective polls, what strategies would you say are Harris and Trump still pushing for at the last minute?
Well, what we've seen from the Harris campaign is a hope and change message similar to Barack Obama's successful message, which got him twice sent to the White House. A looking forward, a not looking back, a turning the page. These are phrases that she uses on the campaign trail and used again in Philadelphia in her final closing arguments on the steps of the famous Rocky steps from the movie in the city of brotherly love. She again and again talks about a new day in America, a new generation of leadership, not acknowledging that she's already been in office for 3.5 years and has not been able to change some of the very policies that she's running against currently. That said, we also have, Donald Trump making a largely negative message about his opponent, drilling down on the negative consequences he says would happen if Harris leads the country economically, particularly on immigration. And both of these camps really running to their core issues, right? Trump running to the economy and the immigration, where he's perceived by voters as being strong, and Harris running to sort of the democratic process and keeping stability as well as defense of reproductive rights, which is bringing a lot of voters to the polls, particularly young voters. So these are the final arguments from both campaigns. Both of the campaigns are now back at their campaign headquarters. Harris is here in the Washington, D.C. area at Howard University, where she will make the election. She'll be watching the election from there. And then Donald Trump, of course, down in Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
Jessica, back in 2020, Joe Biden took 4 days to declare victory, largely due to delays in counting ballots in Pennsylvania. When do you think we can expect clarity on these election results?
That is a really important question, and one I've been studying just to cover this election, because election laws have changed so much around the country since 2020, when we had a lag in vote counting, and that raised questions in parts of the country, particularly in Arizona and in Pennsylvania. But we still haven't had key changes in some critical battleground states. While we've had changes in when the count and the processing of the early vote begins, in Arizona, we did not have those changes in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. They started counting absentee, mail-in, and early votes this morning at 6 a.m. or at 7 a.m., depending on when those polls began opening. And so what that says is that in those states which are going to decide the Electoral College vote, if they are already behind at the beginning of the day, we expect the vote to continue for the day of vote well into the next day and perhaps even beyond. That's even before potential court cases are raised if there are challenges on voter irregularities, on the counting process, on who's voting, on how they're voting. All of those things can take place. As you said, we had a 4-day waiting period for the election result last time. We could be looking at easily that much because we are already seeing a tighter race now in terms of the polling than we did 4 years ago. And remember, it was only 43,000 votes across 3 critical swing states that gave the Biden-Harris administration victory. If it swings in the other way or it's even tighter, you can bet that there's going to be extra eyes on every single ballot being cast during this election.
Okay, just one more question, Jessica, if you will. Based on data or perhaps popular opinion, what do you feel or think would be the likely outcome of all the votes that's been counted? Are we looking at the president-elect again winning by the narrowest of margins with no more than 275 electoral votes? Are we looking at a 2020 scenario? Are we looking at the president-elect winning 4 more swing states, to include Pennsylvania, or a landslide win in the electoral count like former President Donald Trump states?
So I'll be one of the people that will tell you I could not possibly predict the outcome of this election. If I could do that, man, I would probably put that predictive ability to work in some more personally advantageous ways. But certainly this is a very tight election. As I stated earlier, 43,000 votes swung the election 4 years ago. More people are voting. This is a tighter race according to the polls. That doesn't mean we can't be surprised, because we've certainly seen in the last 4 to 8 years that polling doesn't always reflect the electorate accurately. So we continue to watch the polling. We continue to hear from the campaigns what their own internal polling is indicating, but it could run the gamut from a very close election that stretches for days to a landslide if the polling is really off. I couldn't really say. And again, I'm unfortunately not able to be in the prediction business, but I am closely watching, I can assure you.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica Stone, live from Arlington, Virginia. Thanks for your updates.